Hello everyone, welcome to our next Sunday School story, the second one in our series of David in 1 Samuel. So today we're continuing the story of David. Last week, can you remember what we looked at last week? We looked at David being chosen by God, didn't we, to be the next king. And this week we'll have the next part of the story, which will probably be very familiar to you all. But first of all, what do you do when things go wrong? Have a think. When things go wrong, what do you tend to do? Do you try and fix it yourself and, oh, I'll be able to sort that out. I'll do it. I don't need anyone else's help. I will fix it. Or do you sit back and wait for someone else to fix it and go, I can't do that. Someone else will come along and fix it for me. Do you turn your back and go, if I turn my back and close my eyes, then I can pretend it's not happening? Do you do that? Do you pretend it's not happening and turn your back and just try and forget it? Or do you go and sit in a corner and just be really sad about the whole situation and can't think about anything else? Well, our passage today will show us that the only way to deal with things that go wrong in our lives is to put our trust in God, is to have faith in God and in what He is doing. So our story starts with the Israelites. Okay, the army of the Israelites, they're ready to go to war. And they're going to war with enemies of God, the Philistines, those evil people who were enemies of God. And the army came to fight King Saul's army. And every day this bloke came out of the Philistines' army, this huge, big giant of a man would come out and yell at the top of his voice at the people of Israel. And his name was Goliath. He said, "Bring out your best soldier to fight me. If your strongest soldier defeats me, we will be your slaves. But if I defeat him, you will be our slaves." Well, King Saul's soldiers were really scared at this point, and none of them wanted to go and fight Goliath. David's brothers were in the army too, but David wasn't because he was too young, so he was looking after his father's sheep. His father told him, "Go take food to your brothers in the army so that they can keep going," and off he went. But when David reached the army and gave his food, he heard and saw Goliath come out and give his threat. He heard what Goliath had said, and he turned to some of the soldiers around him, asking them what was happening. Well, someone heard David asking about it, and he told Saul, and Saul beckoned David. Saul got David to be brought in front of him. Once David was before King Saul, he said, "I can fight the Philistine. No one needs to be scared." But Saul said, "You cannot fight the Philistine. You're too young." David said, "God will be with me. God has helped me fight lion and bear to protect my father's sheep. God will protect me now." So Saul agreed, and he tried to give him some of his own armor to wear against Goliath. But David tried it on, but it was so heavy and so big, and he couldn't walk around in it properly. So he decided not to wear it. Instead, he took his slingshot and he picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and went before Goliath. Goliath laughed at him, ha 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 ha, when he saw David. But David said, "You will come at me with your sword and spear, but I come with the Lord at my side." David put a stone in his sling and swung it and swung it and flew it at Goliath, and it hit him in the middle of the forehead, and he fell down dead. The Philistines saw Goliath fall, and they ran away. They were so scared, and the Israelite army ran after them and defeated them. Saul was so impressed at what David had done and asked him who his father was. He wanted to know more about him. And David said, I am the son of Jesse in Bethlehem. Isn't that an amazing story? Wow, we hear that so much, don't we? It's a very familiar story, but hearing it again, to think about David, this young lad, not even in the army yet, going out to fight this huge man. Let me tell you how tall Goliath was. Goliath was huge. He was 9 foot tall, over 9 feet tall. Wow, I don't think we know anyone today who's that tall. This is what I would look like standing next to him. Wow, really tall. But David defeated him because God was with him. Last week, we saw that despite David not looking like a king, God chose him to be the next one. This week, we see God using David to save his own people. Wow! We see that David's faith in God is strong. David's faith in God is so strong. He didn't have any fear. He didn't have any fear when he saw how big Goliath was. He didn't listen to anyone who told him he couldn't do it. He didn't listen when Goliath laughed at him. He knew that God was with him and would help him and would use him to save Israel. He had faith in God. And we want to be all like David. We should all be like David, shouldn't we? When things go wrong, that we have no fear because our faith is in God. We also see that David points to Jesus. Can you see how? Where would you put yourself in this story? We want to be like David, but when things go wrong, we're more like the army. I don't know about you, but I think I'm more like the people in the army, scared and worried about everything that goes wrong. And if I saw Goliath, I think I'd be scared out my wits. But David is like Jesus. All around him are mocking him and not seeing him as a rescuer, yet God used him to do the biggest rescue ever. To save us not from a huge 9 foot bloke, but from sin, from the biggest enemy that we have. David's rescue points to Jesus. So when things go wrong and we're scared, afraid, worried, don't know what's happening, when we try and fix it ourselves or try and ignore it, bury our heads in the sand, we need to think about David. Think about that young lad who had such faith in God that he wasn't scared when he didn't even know what would happen. We want to have faith like David, to be able to face anything. And so when we feel weak, we can look to Jesus, the greatest rescue of all, to help us have faith in God, can't we? And see that God is at work, that God is always at work. And that's amazing. That's a great thing to know, isn't it? And when we need help, what do? Well, we talk to God, don't we? We ask him to help us to be like David. So let's talk to God now and ask him to help us. Dear God, thank you so much for this wonderful story of your rescue through David. Help us to be more like David and not like the army when things come our way that we don't know or understand. Help us to have more and more faith in you, Lord, that we are not afraid, that we know you are with us and in control. Please help us this week, whatever we face. Amen. Have a great Sunday, everyone. Bye.